This is Senior Algebra, Section 9.3, Solving Quadratic Equations with the Quadratic Formula. So today, we're looking at a third way to solve a quadratic here. We've looked at factoring, we've looked at completing the square. A third way is with the quadratic formula. It's a version of the completing the square here. So the first one, we look at the standard form ax squared plus bx plus c. We have to identify where a, b, and c are. A, always by the x squared. B, always by the x. C is always the constant. We usually write it in descending order like that, and we have the 0 there. It ends in a 0 here. So if I look at example 1, in A, well, A is 3. It's in front of x squared, B is 5, and C is a negative 8. Now, sometimes you may have to rewrite this. So in this one, I'm going to move the 8 over. I'm going to move the 2x over. I get x squared minus 14 plus 7x equals 0. Then I'm going to write it in descending order. Ax squared plus bx plus c. So x squared plus 7x minus 14 equals 0. So my a, what number is in front of the x squared? Well, that's a 1. My b, what number is in front of x? 7. And then c, my constant is negative 14. So we use this general equation, and what we'll do in class is I'll show you that we basically derive the quadratic formula there. We're going to do completing the square on the general solution and get the quadratic formula. So you won't have to memorize it. It's not a bad thing to memorize, but on the exam you will not have to memorize that. It will be given to you. So it's the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So in example 2, first thing, what's my a, what's my b, and what's my c? And then it just becomes a plug and chug type of problem here. X is the opposite of b, so the opposite of negative 7. It's important that you use parentheses here. And then negative 7 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 9. All over 2a. A is 2 here, so 2 times 2. My next step, I'm going to do a little simplifying here. So I get x equals, on the bottom I'm going to get a 4, 2 and 2 is 4. The opposite of negative 7, that's 7, plus or minus, and then I'm going to evaluate each part here. So negative 7 squared, 49. And then if I look here, when I'm doing this, I look, that's a negative, that's a negative. A negative times a negative is a positive. And then I'm looking 4 times 2 times 9. Well, that's 72 here. My next step, I'm going to put together the stuff inside the square root then. So I get x equals 7 plus or minus the square root of 121 all over 4. So at this point, if I look at the square root of 121, okay, if I can simplify that, I will. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. In this case, square root of 121, I can do that. It does come out as an integer here. So I am going to go ahead and go a little bit farther here. So it's 7 plus or minus 11 all over 4. Now remember, the plus or minus means I have two equations, one where it's positive, one where it's negative here. So I have 7 plus 11 over 4 and 7 minus 11 all over 4. So I'm going to get 18 over 4, which simplifies to 9/2, and negative 4 over 4, which simplifies to negative 1. So in example 3, now we're going to solve using the quadratic formula again. I'm going to rewrite it, get everything on one side, write it in a squared, single term, then the variable, then the number here. So my a is 1, my b is negative 2, and my c is 20. I'm going to plug it into the quadratic formula. X is the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared, minus 4ac all over 2a. The opposite of b, the opposite of negative 2, plus or minus the square root, negative 2 squared, minus 4 times 1 times c, all over 2 times 1. When I do this, on the bottom I get a 2, I get an opposite of negative 2, which is 2. And then I get 4 minus, because it's 1 negative, I think I'm going to get minus 80 here. So I'm going to simplify what's inside the square root, and I get this. 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 76 all over 2. Now at this point, can I look at this? The square root of negative 76. Well, in this case, I can't take the square root of a negative number. I get a non-real answer here. So at this point, you're done. We say there are no real solutions. I cannot solve this with real answers. Now, what does this look like graphically? Well, remember a quadratic is going to be kind of that U shape here. And if I look at this, I want to find one at 0 here. So in this case, where does it cross the x-axis? In this case, it doesn't. That's why we get no solution here, no real solution. If I look back at example 2 that we did, where does it cross the x-axis? In this case, it's going to cross at negative 1 and at 9/2, or 4.5. So the graph would look something like that. And again, just a rough sketch here of what it would look like. All right, the last one, b here. So again, I'm going to move the 9 over. X squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. A is 1, B is negative 6, and C is 9 here. So I'm going to plug it into the quadratic formula. Now, sometimes with these, you're going to be given a choice. Do you want to try to factor it? Do you want to solve by completing the square? Do you want to solve using the quadratic formula? As I put this in, I get x equals, I'm going to get opposite of negative 6, so that's 6. On the bottom, I'm going to get a 2, and here I get a 36 minus 36. So when I simplify it, I get 6 plus or minus the square root of 0 all over 2. Well, what is the square root of 0? What times itself is 0? Well, that's just 0 here. So in this case, I get 6 plus 0, 6 minus 0. Well, what happens? What's 6 plus 0? That's 6. What's 6 minus 0? That's 6. I really only get one answer here. X equals 3. Because it's 0. Now, if I was doing this, is there another way to solve it? Yeah. I could just factor this, and watch what happens when I factor. This is going to be x minus 3, x minus 3. When I solve these, now x minus 3 equals 0, so x equals 3. Solve this one, x minus 3 equals 0, x equals 3. So I get 3 twice. I get the same answer here. So what's known as a double root? Now, graphically, what would this look like? A double root does this. It doesn't go through the x-axis, it just touches it. So if I look at where 3 is, I know it's going to, we say cross there at 3, but it's not going to go all the way through it, it's just going to touch it. So it'll look like this. So you're going to have 3 different possibilities here. One where you get 2 solutions for the quadratic formula, one where you get 1 solution like the one we just did, and then finally one where there is no solution when you have the square root of a negative.